Another primitive attempt at understanding advanced genetics, no doubt Dr. Quaxx Brightscale muttered to himself, his crystalline eyes tracking the movements of their newest addition to the Galactic Science Academy's prestigious xenobiology department. The human Sarah Chen, as she called herself, was currently hovering over a quantum microscope like a Venusian moth drawn to a plasma lamp. Her movements were erratic, unpredictable. The way she bounced from station to station in the pristine laboratory made his secondary heart flutter with anxiety. "Dr. Chen," he called out, his voice modulator carefully calibrated to sound both authoritative and condescending. "Do remember that our equipment is calibrated for beings with, shall we say, more refined motor control." Sarah looked up, flashing what humans called a smile, truly a terrifying display of bone fragments in their face holes. "Oh, don't worry, Dr. Brightscale. I've actually improved the sensitivity of this quantum scope by 47%. Did you know if you adjust the particle flow matrix just so?" She demonstrated with her crude appendages, somehow making the billion-credit machine purr like a well-tuned singularity drive. Impossible. Dr. Brightscale's scales shifted from their normal prestigious azure to a slightly paler shade of disbelief. He glided closer on his gravity cushion, all forearms clutching his datapad protectively against his thorax. "Now see here," he started, his voice rising to what humans might call a snippy tone. "The quantum Marlax 9000 was perfected by the finest minds in the Centaurian Empire over 3 generations. You can't simply—" The readout on the screen stopped his protest mid-sentence. The resolution was, indeed, noticeably sharper. His left eye twitched involuntarily. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Professor Zeta Starwhisper floated into the lab, her bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with what Brightscale recognized as barely contained amusement. "Our Deathworlder friend here has quite the knack for improvisation." Improvisation, Brightscale practically spat the word. "Science isn't about improvisation, it's about careful, methodical results," Sarah interjected cheerfully, pulling up a holographic display of her morning's work. "Because I've also managed to sequence that impossible protein chain you've been working on for the past 3 cycles. The lab fell silent, save for the gentle hum of antimatter containment fields and Professor Starwhisper's poorly concealed chuckle. Brightscale's scales now shifted through several shades of purple, a clear sign of intellectual distress among his species. That's completely unauthorized," he finally managed to sputter. "The research protocols clearly state." "Oh. Speaking of protocols," Sarah chirped, somehow managing to tap on 3 different holographic interfaces simultaneously, a display of coordination that made Brightscale's exoskeleton itch. "I had this amazing idea about combining Rigellian stem cells with modified Earth extremophile DNA. Would you like to see my proposal?" Professor Starwhisper's tendrils were now practically glowing with delight. "I believe, Dr. Brightscale, you're about to discover why the Academy Board insisted on having a Deathworlder in our program." Brightscale could only watch in horror as Sarah Chen, representative of a species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel, began pulling up research models that would make a Betelgeusean quantum master weep with envy. Perhaps, he thought with growing dread, they should have paid more attention to how a species that evolved on a Category 12 death world might approach the art of science. He had no idea just how right he was. The next cycle brought fresh horrors to Dr. Brightscale's perfectly ordered laboratory. Sarah Chen had transformed their prestigious research facility into what she cheerfully called innovative chaos. The mere thought made his scales itch. "You cannot simply combine Rigellian stem cells with. What did you call these monstrosities?" Brightscale demanded, his gravity cushion wobbling with agitation. "Tardigrades," Sarah beamed, adjusting something that looked suspiciously like Earth-made equipment. "Fascinating little creatures. Nearly indestructible. They can survive in space, extreme temperatures, radiation. Perfect for enhancing the durability of the stem cells." From across the lab, Dr. Lumix Sparkweave whispered to his colleague, assistant researcher Blip, 50 credits says she causes a containment breach within 3 rotations. His phosphorescent antennae twinkled with mischief. 100 says 2 rotations. Blip chittered back, their exoskeleton clicking with barely suppressed amusement. "Did you see what she did to the quantum harmonizer yesterday?" Brightscale's auditory receptors twitched in irritation. The betting pool on the human's inevitable failure had grown to include nearly every researcher in the xenobiology department. Even the maintenance drones were getting in on it. "Dr. Chen," he announced, trying to sound authoritative while hiding his mounting panic, "your methodology is unprecedented, and not in a good way. You're using grade 7 quantum stabilizers for a grade 3 experiment." Sarah didn't even look up from her work. Oh, that's because I'm running the process in reverse. See, instead of stabilizing the quantum field, I'm deliberately introducing controlled chaos to mimic the natural genetic adaptation process. It's like... She paused, searching for words, like making a smoothie instead of carefully layering a cake. A collective gasp echoed through the laboratory. Professor Zeta Starwhisper, who had been observing from her favorite corner, actually dropped her datapad. Did she just? Compare advanced genetic manipulation to a beverage blip, whispered, their mandibles quivering with shock. This is precisely why humans shouldn't be allowed near sensitive equipment, Brightscale muttered, all four hands frantically taking notes. They think billions of years of evolution can be replicated like some primitive food preparation. Sarah continued her work, humming what she called an old earth tune, some barbaric rhythm about eyes and tigers. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, making adjustments that violated at least 15 safety protocols and 2 fundamental laws of genetics. Look here, she said excitedly, pointing to a swirling mass of cells in the containment field. The tardigrade DNA is already beginning to merge with the Rigellian stem cells. Isn't it beautiful? Beautiful wasn't the word Brightscale would have chosen. Terrifying, perhaps. Impossible, definitely. The cells were shifting and changing in ways that defied every textbook in the Academy's vast library. Make that 200 credits on a containment breach, Sparkweave muttered to Blip. 300 says she accidentally creates a sentient species, came a new voice. Everyone turned to stare at Professor Starwhisper, who simply wiggled her tendrils in what passed for a shrug among her kind. Sarah's voice cut through the whispers. Dr. Brightscale, you might want to see this. The hybrid cells are showing signs of rapid adaptation. There. Oh, this is interesting. They're developing some sort of crystalline structure. Brightscale glided over, his professional curiosity temporarily overcoming his terror. The display showed something that shouldn't be possible: cells that combine the indestructibility of Earth's most resilient organism with the adaptive properties of Rigellian biotechnology. This is completely unorthodox, he complained, even as his scientific mind began racing with the possibilities. The Academy board will never approve. Oh, they already did, Sarah said cheerfully, pulling up an authorization form signed by the board's entire ruling council. They seemed quite excited about the potential applications. Something about revolutionizing space colonization. Brightscale's scales shifted to a pale yellow of resignation. Somewhere behind him, credit chits were already changing hands as the betting pool revised its odds. Whatever happened next, he had a sinking feeling that their definition of proper scientific methodology was about to undergo a dramatic revision. And that damned human just kept humming. The first warning sign was a subtle flicker in the lab's quantum containment fields. The second was Sarah Chen's sudden, "Oh, that's unexpected." Nothing good in the history of the Galactic Science Academy had ever followed those words. Containment field fluctuation detected, announced the lab's AI in its soothing multitonal voice. Power surge in sectors 7 through 12. Recommend immediate. Boom. A blast of purple energy erupted from Sarah's experimental chamber, sending Dr. Brightscale tumbling off his gravity cushion with an undignified squawk. Assistant researcher Blip disappeared under their desk, all 6 legs tucked in protectively. Dr. Lumik's Sparkweave's antennae went rigid with shock, literally glowing with panic. Emergency protocols initiated, screamed the lab AI, its soothing voice replaced by urgent alarm tones. All non-essential personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a... Oh, don't worry about that, Sarah called out, calmly adjusting controls as arcs of energy danced around her. It's just the tardigrade DNA expressing itself. Quite fascinating, really. Fascinating, Brightscale screeched, trying to right himself while his scales flashed emergency patterns. The containment field is at 300% above normal parameters. The whole system could. Another surge rocked the laboratory. Professor Starwhisper's tendrils were now coiled so tightly they resembled springs. Perhaps, she suggested mildly, we should consider emergency decontamination procedures. Deploying containment foam in 3, 2, the AI began. Wait, Sarah held up a hand, still focused on her readings. Look at these energy signatures. The crystalline structures we observed earlier? They're not just adapting to the power surge, they're absorbing it. Indeed, the purple energy was being drawn into the experimental chamber like water down a drain. The hybrid cells were growing, changing, transforming in ways that made Brightscale's scientific brain short-circuit. This is impossible, he muttered, picking himself up. The energy levels alone should have killed everything in the chamber. Sarah grinned. Tardigrades, remember? Add in some Rigellian adaptive properties and, well, looks like we've created something new. The emergency sirens suddenly stopped. The AI, sounding almost confused, announced anomalous energy readings stabilizing, containment field integrity improving. Brightscale watched in disbelief as Sarah waltzed through the aftermath of what should have been a catastrophic containment breach, taking readings and making notes as if this were all perfectly normal. Behind him, he could hear credit chits changing hands again. Apparently, someone had won big on spectacular disaster that somehow makes things better. Dr. Chen, he managed finally, his voice modulator cracking slightly. Did you plan this? Sarah's only response was that terrifying human smile and a cheerful, "Would you like to see what's growing in there now?" Brightscale wasn't sure what disturbed him more, the fact that their experiment had just violated several laws of physics, or the fact that the humans seemed to consider this a perfectly reasonable day at work. The containment chamber hummed with an otherworldly resonance as Dr. Brightscale and his colleagues crowded around the observation window. Inside, something unprecedented was taking shape. By the 7 singularities breathed Dr. Lumix Sparkweave, his antennae practically tied in knots. Those crystals, they're growing. Sarah pressed her face against the reinforced plasma glass, practically bouncing with excitement. Look at that cellular structure. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. The tardigrade DNA combined with the Rigellian stem cells has created some sort of crystalline biological matrix. Inside the chamber, iridescent crystals pulsed with purple-blue light, growing and reshaping themselves in real time. They formed intricate patterns that seemed to follow some mysterious mathematical sequence, each new growth adding to the complexity of the whole. It's consuming the excess energy from the surge, assistant researcher Blip observed, their mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. But that's not even the most disturbing part. Those patterns, they're not random. Professor Starwhisper's tendrils waved in fascination as she analyzed the readings. The crystalline structures appear to be forming neural-like pathways, almost as if they're thinking. Sarah completed the thought, her grin growing wider. We've created a silicon-organic hybrid life form that feeds on pure energy. Dr. Brightscale's scales shifted through every shade of panic in his species' considerable range. This is unprecedented, uncontrolled, completely outside any acceptable parameters of. He was cut off by a collective gasp as the crystals suddenly shifted, forming what appeared to be sensory organs. Faceted surfaces caught and reflected light in ways that suggested visual processing capabilities. Thin, crystalline filaments extended outward, probing the chamber's atmosphere. "Oh, wonderful," Sarah exclaimed, furiously taking notes. "It's developing environmental awareness. The Rigellian adaptive properties are allowing it to create specialized structures for interaction with its surroundings." "But what exactly have we created?" Sparkweave demanded, his professional curiosity finally overcoming his terror. "It's not purely crystalline, not purely organic. It processes energy like a living battery, grows like a bacterial colony, but shows signs of neural development like a sentient species." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "I'm calling them Crystal Medusae. See how those filaments wave like tentacles? They've got the tardigrade's indestructibility, the Rigellian cell's adaptive capabilities, and some completely new properties we've never seen before." The creature, because there was no denying it was a creature, now had developed to roughly the size of a human hand. Its core was a complex matrix of purple-blue crystals that pulsed with stored energy. Delicate crystalline tendrils extended from this central mass, each tipped with what appeared to be specialized sensory nodes. The entire structure floated serenely in the containment field, occasionally releasing small bursts of energy that manifested as beautiful aurora-like displays. "It's beautiful," Professor Starwhisper admitted, her tendrils swaying in harmony with the creature's movements. "Beautiful," Brightscale's voice rose to a near screech. "It's an entirely new form of life that breaks at least 15 known laws of biology. The ethics committee will have our exoskeletons for this. The containment protocols alone." "Oh, but look," Sarah interrupted, pointing excitedly. "It's reproducing." Sure enough, small crystal buds were forming on the creature's surface, eventually breaking off to form tiny, independent entities that began their own growth cycles. "Asexual reproduction through energy-driven crystalline budding," Sarah narrated, her voice filled with pure joy. "Each new generation seems to maintain the base genetic memory while having the potential for further adaptation. They're perfect for space exploration, self-replicating, energy efficient, virtually indestructible, and completely unpredictable, Brightscale added, though he couldn't tear his eyes away from the mesmerizing display. We have no idea how they'll interact with other life forms, or what their full capabilities might be. Sarah's response was cut off by a new development. The Crystal Medusae had begun arranging themselves in geometric patterns, their energy pulses synchronizing in what appeared to be. Are they communicating? Blip whispered, their scientific detachment completely forgotten. Welcome to the future of xenobiology, Sarah said proudly, watching as their accidental creation continued to evolve before their eyes. I think this is going to make for one interesting research paper. Professor Starwhisper smiled knowingly. I believe my colleagues were about to discover why bringing a Deathworlder's perspective to our research might have been the most brilliant decision the Academy ever made. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Science Academy's High Council was in its 4th hour. And Dr. Brightscale's scales hadn't stopped twitching since it began. Let me understand this correctly, Grand Administrator Pulsar rumbled from his floating day eyes, all 7 eye stalks focused intensely on the research team. A human researcher combined virtually indestructible Earth microorganisms with Rigellian stem cells, caused a massive power surge, and accidentally created a new species. That's an oversimplification of the process, Sarah Chen explained cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling through the chamber, though technically accurate. The council chamber erupted in a cacophony of protests, accusations, and what sounded suspiciously like someone choking on their ceremonial greeting spores. This is precisely why allowing Deathworlders into our prestigious institution was a mistake, Professor Nexus declared, his crystalline form vibrating with indignation. They have no respect for proper procedures. The data speaks for itself, Professor Starwhisper countered, her tendrils pulsing with barely contained excitement. The Crystal Medusae represent the most significant breakthrough in xenobiology in the past 3 centuries. Breakthrough. Dr. Lumik's Sparkweave's antennae were practically tied in knots. It's a catastrophe waiting to happen. These creatures multiply exponentially, feed on pure energy, and show signs of collective intelligence. Sarah cleared her throat. Actually, that's the exciting part. Our latest tests show they're not just intelligent, they're solving complex mathematical problems we feed into their containment field. Watch this. She activated a holoscreen, displaying footage of the Crystal Medusae arranging themselves into complex geometric patterns. They can process quantum calculations faster than our best supercomputers. And here's the really interesting part. The council leaned forward collectively as Sarah pulled up another display. They're actually stabilizing our quantum containment fields. The energy absorption and redistribution properties of their crystalline structure make them perfect for regulating high-energy systems. That's actually brilliant, muttered assistant researcher Blip, who had been quietly calculating potential applications. They could revolutionize our entire approach to energy management. Grand Administrator Pulsar's eye stalks swayed thoughtfully. And you're certain they pose no threat? Well, Sarah began, they're completely non-aggressive, can't survive in organic tissue, and are easily controlled by adjusting energy levels. Plus, they seem to genuinely enjoy helping us. Watch this. The next hologram showed a Crystal Medusa gently correcting a misaligned quantum beam by absorbing and redirecting excess energy. It almost seemed to dance with joy as it completed its task. This is unprecedented, Professor Nexus grumbled, though his crystalline form had stopped vibrating quite so aggressively. The methodology was completely unorthodox. Yet successful, Professor Starwhisper interjected. Perhaps it's time we reconsidered our definition of proper scientific methodology. The human's approach, while chaotic, does appear to produce interesting results, Dr. Brightscale found himself admitting. His scales shifted to a thoughtful blue-green, and the applications for space exploration alone. Precisely, Sarah beamed. The Crystal Medusae could revolutionize everything from spacecraft shielding to quantum computing. They're like living problem solvers. The council chamber buzzed with excited discussion. Even the most staunch traditionalists couldn't deny the potential benefits. Grand Administrator Pulsar's eye stalks performed a complex dance that indicated deep contemplation. Dr. Chen, he announced finally, while your methods are unconventional, the results speak for themselves. The Academy hereby officially recognizes the Crystal Medusae as a new species, with all research rights assigned to your team. Sarah's thank you was interrupted by alarms blaring from her data pad. Oh, speaking of research, you might want to see this. They've just solved that 1,000-year-old quantum paradox that's been bothering the physics department. Apparently it was all about energy wave harmonics. They've drawn us a diagram. The council stared in stunned silence at the elegant mathematical solution floating in holographic form above Sarah's pad. Dr. Brightscale noticed several of the more senior physicists present looking like they might faint. Perhaps Professor Starwhisper suggested diplomatically, her tendrils curling with amusement, we should discuss increasing the budget for human-led research initiatives. Somewhere in the back of the chamber, credit chits were once again changing hands. Apparently someone had won big on accidental breakthrough leads to complete paradigm shift in galactic science. And Sarah Chen just stood there, grinning that terrifying human grin, already scribbling notes for her next experiment. The revelation came 3 cycles after the council meeting, during what should have been a routine observation session. Dr. Brightscale was updating the experiment logs when he noticed something odd about the Crystal Medusae's behavior patterns. Dr. Chen, he called out, his scales shifting to a puzzled orange, these energy fluctuation sequences. They're not random at all, are they? Sarah looked up from her workstation, that familiar human smile playing across her face. I was wondering who would notice first. Take a look at the long-term pattern analysis. The holographic display sparked to life, showing weeks of data. The Crystal Medusae's energy pulses, when mapped over time, formed a clear pattern, one that looked suspiciously like. That's a research proposal, Professor Starwhisper gasped, her tendrils coiling in shock. They're suggesting modifications to their own containment field, but that would mean they've been deliberately leading us toward more efficient energy management systems, Sarah confirmed, looking like a proud parent. Every accident, every power surge, every unexpected development. They were learning, adapting, and teaching us at the same time. Dr. Lumik's Sparkweave's antennae began twitching violently. But that's impossible. Unless he turned to stare at Sarah, realization dawning. You knew this would happen. The laboratory fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the containment fields. Even assistant researcher Blip stopped their perpetual mandible clicking. Well, Sarah said, leaning back in her chair with an air of satisfaction, let's just say I had a strong hypothesis about combining adaptive Rigellian stem cells with Earth's most resilient life form. The power surge just provided the perfect conditions for rapid evolution. You planned the accident, Dr. Brightscale's voice modulator cracked with disbelief. All those containment field fluctuations, the energy spikes, were carefully calculated to create optimal conditions for the emergence of crystalline consciousness, Sarah finished. Though I must admit, they exceeded my expectations. I didn't anticipate they'd develop such an elegant solution to quantum computing. The Crystal Medusae in the containment field pulsed with what now seemed unmistakably like amusement, their geometric patterns shifting to display complex mathematical equations. By the cosmic core, Professor Starwhisper breathed, her tendrils waving in excitement. They're not just intelligent, they're teaching us. All those helpful little accidents were their way of gradually introducing us to their capabilities without overwhelming our existing scientific paradigms, Sarah nodded. Quite considerate of them, really. Dr. Brightscale sank onto his gravity cushion, his scales cycling through colors so rapidly he looked like a malfunctioning light display. But the protocols, the safety regulations, the proper scientific methodology. Oh, those were all followed, Sarah assured him, pulling up yet another holographic display. Just not in the order you expected. Sometimes the best way to advance science is to let it look like an accident. The Crystal Medusae arranged themselves into what was unmistakably a smiling face, their energy pulses synchronizing in what could only be described as laughter. You magnificently devious human, Dr. Brightscale found himself saying, his scales settling into a deep purple of respectful awe. You've revolutionized 3 different fields of science by pretending to be chaotic. 4 fields, actually, Professor Starwhisper corrected, reviewing the latest data. They've just provided insights into dark matter manipulation that our physicists haven't even thought to consider yet. Sarah shrugged modestly. Sometimes the best way to help advance galactic science is to let everyone think you're just a slightly primitive Deathworlder who got lucky. Makes it easier for people to accept new ideas when they think they discovered them themselves. The implications were staggering. Every major scientific institution in the galaxy would need to reevaluate their approach to research. The careful, methodical procedures that had governed galactic science for millennia were being upended by a human who had turned accident-prone chaos into a revolutionary methodology. I don't suppose, Dr. Brightscale said carefully, his voice modulator struggling to maintain its usual condescending tone, you'd be interested in co-authoring a paper on innovative research methodologies. Sarah's grin widened as she watched the Crystal Medusae begin sketching out what appeared to be blueprints for an improved faster-than-light drive. I thought you'd never ask. In their containment field, the Crystal Medusae pulsed with satisfied brilliance, having successfully completed their part in what might be the most elaborate and productive practical joke in the history of galactic science. One standard galactic year later, Dr. Brightscale found himself doing something he never thought possible, enthusiastically filling out application forms for the Human Exchange Student Program. 3 human interns, Professor Starwhisper's tendrils twitched with amusement as she peered over his shoulder. My, how times have changed. Wasn't it you who said, and I quote, letting Deathworlders near sensitive equipment is like giving a quantum accelerator to a Jovian space whale? Yes, well. Brightscale's scales flushed a delicate shade of embarrassment. That was before our lab's productivity increased by 300% thanks to what Dr. Chen calls controlled chaos theory. Besides, the Crystal Medusae seemed to prefer working with humans, something about their thought patterns being more compatible. In their expanded containment field, now taking up an entire wing of the Academy, the Crystal Medusae were currently helping test new spacecraft shielding designs. Their gentle pulses of energy formed complex patterns that somehow managed to convey both mathematical precision and unmistakable enthusiasm. Speaking of Dr. Chen, Sparkweave called from his workstation, antennae bobbing excitedly. Have you seen the latest results from her new experiment? Apparently she's teaching the Crystal Medusae to dance. For fun. For calibration purposes, Sarah corrected, not looking up from her datapad. Though I must admit, their interpretation of human ballet is quite impressive. Dr. Brightscale watched as several Crystal Medusae performed what appeared to be a mathematically perfect rendition of Swan Lake, complete with energy pulse accompaniment. His scales shifted to a thoughtful blue. You know, he mused, perhaps we were wrong about what makes a species primitive or advanced. Here we were, thinking strict adherence to established procedures was the height of scientific sophistication, while the supposedly primitive species was playing a long game so subtle we didn't even realize we were part of the experiment. Professor Starwhisper finished, her tendrils curling with mirth. Sarah finally looked up, flashing that still somewhat terrifying human smile. Oh, don't sell yourselves short. You did create a beautiful laboratory for us to accidentally revolutionize galactic science in. The Crystal Medusae pulsed in what everyone had learned to recognize as laughter, their crystalline forms spelling out complex equations that just happened to look like smiley faces. Dr. Brightscale adjusted his gravity cushion and began finalizing the intern request forms. Well, as the humans say, if you can't beat them, join them, Sarah suggested. Actually, I was going to say give them a laboratory and watch them rewrite the laws of physics, but yes, that works too. In their field, the Crystal Medusae arranged themselves into a perfect model of the galaxy, with one small annotation pulsing above it in crystal clear clarity: primitive species not found. Sometimes, Dr. Brightscale reflected, the best scientific discoveries come not from following the rules, but from knowing exactly how to break them, preferably with style, and perhaps just a touch of Deathworlder chaos.